agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a professor of political science at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney and defender of freedom, Jay Carson.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, Jay, how are you?
Good.
I'm doing okay myself. So there were a number of things actually we didn't get a chance to get to on our weekend show. I kind of expected that because I figured we'd be talking about the Silicon Valley Bank failure a lot. And we were
complicated.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot going on there. But there are a bunch of other things we wanted to get to. And one of those things is the Willow oil project. Now, Jay, I would say it's fair to say you're generally not a fan of the Biden administration, but I think this is a decision I expect you'll like, and one that I'm maybe a little less crazy about.
It is. I was pleasantly surprised.
So yeah, and on Monday of this last week, the Biden Interior Department announced that it approved ConocoPhillips's multi-billion-dollar Willow drilling project on public lands in Alaska's North Slope. And this is one of the biggest new projects in Alaska in really in a generation or so. And the decision comes after years of delays and lawsuits from environmental groups as well as some Alaska Native groups. And it's a pretty significant reversal for Biden, who as a presidential candidate promised, in his words, no more drilling on federal lands, period, 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 period. That's 4 periods if you're counting. So there you go. Now, I should point out, though, that ConocoPhillips had held leases to the prospective drilling sites for more than 2 decades. And administration attorneys argued that by refusing a permit, that would trigger a lawsuit that could cost the government as much as $5 billion if ConocoPhillips won, which they thought they would, because the leases are in effect a contract, and denying the permits without sufficient cause would likely result in a judge ruling against the administration. Now,
one would hope.
Yeah, well, now ConocoPhillips estimates that the project will create around 2,500 jobs during construction, around 300 permanent jobs, produce around about 180,000 barrels of oil per day at its peak, and 600 million barrels over 30 years, and result in somewhere between $8 to $17 billion in new revenue to the federal government over that 30-year life of the project. But along with this, sort of in an effort to placate environmentalists, the administration also announced that it was indefinitely withdrawing 2.8 million acres in the Arctic Ocean from future oil and gas leases, as well as writing new regulations on land drilling in Alaska. And the Interior Department made a point of noting that they had substantially reduced the size of the project, denying ConocoPhillips 2 of the 5 drill sites they requested for a 40% overall reduction in the size of the project. And as you might expect, there will be lawsuits to follow, just like there were when the Trump administration approved the project in 2020. And the first 2, in fact, came this week from the environmental group Earth Justice and the law firm Trustees for Alaska. And these groups are asking for an injunction and arguing that the environmental analysis done by the Biden administration, which concluded that the project won't have a major impact on the environment or climate, is deeply flawed. They specifically cite the analysis failure to consider the effect of the project on threatened species, including polar bears, which are native to the region in which the drilling would occur. And these lawsuits have been filed in the U.S. District Court for Alaska, which in 2021 vacated the Trump administration's permits due to an insufficient environmental review. And if these groups are successful in their request for an injunction, it could actually delay construction for at least a year, because major parts of this construction rely on ice roads, which will become impassable by some point in April, so a little more than a month from now. So, Jay, I know your maybe default is drill, baby, drill, but there's a little bit more to it than that. So what's your take on this?
No, actually, I don't know that there's much more than that. I'm pretty simplistic. Look, I think we ought to take advantage of the natural resources we have, and to the full extent we can. It's heartening that the administration has approved what it approved. It's a little disappointing it didn't approve everything. But I think a sure supply of oil is vital to our economy, our national security, and indeed world security to some extent. So I will revert to the simplistic drill, baby, drill.
Well, I think there's more to it because number one, because the project could average, and these estimates tend to always be overstated. I think you would agree, around 20 million barrels of oil per year, roughly, if you average it over a 30-year period. And for context, that's just over a day's worth of U.S. oil consumption from 2021, which was the last year I could find data. So this is not a huge difference. And according, in fact, to the administration's model, the project will lower global oil prices by around 20 cents per barrel once it's operating at peak capacity, which is going to take a while. So to give you a sense of what that means, as of last week, the benchmark for a barrel of oil for Brent was trading at around $75 a barrel. So 20 cents, this is not a big deal, as one person pointed out. It's not really going to make a dent in either prices or supply of oil. But what it will do, at least to a certain extent, is make a difference in terms of carbon emission. I mean, the Interior Department analysis found that it would add 239 million metric tons of carbon emissions over the next 30 years. That's an average around 9 million metric tons per year. And to put this in the context, in 2021, which is the last year for which the EPA has publicly available data, the U.S. produced around 5,593 million metric tons of emissions, meaning that the Willow project would be around a 0.16% increase, or roughly the equivalent of adding around 2 million gasoline-powered vehicles to the road. So that kind of, I think, puts it in some context. And I mean, I guess my position is that I think the Biden administration's legal analysis is probably right. And if you had to approve it anyway, if you were going to lose the lawsuit and have to pay out all this money, well, you might as well just go ahead and approve it in the first place. But I think that environmentally, it's certainly a loss without being much of a gain in terms of energy security.
I say more oil is better than zero oil. The other important thing that I think this signals, and this has been a problem for me throughout when Biden would say things like no drilling, period. The message that sent, as well as things like we're going to bankrupt coal companies and so forth. The message that sends to that sector is don't bother investing. And that's because we've talked about this a whole lot of times. These projects take a long time to get going, a long time to get up to speed, a long time before they start producing results. If you take away that incentive to even invest, because listen, it's just going to get denied eventually. I think that's terrible, and that impacts markets in terms of you're always not necessarily just pricing oil based on how much is available today, but how much is available you think tomorrow, and what that capacity is going to be. So to me, I think it's a good thing. And regardless, it's better to have more domestic facilities available in case of an international shock.
Yeah, except that it doesn't quite work that way, because the type of oil that's going to be produced here is not really the type of oil that works well with the biggest refineries. And so, I mean, there's a lot. Oil is not just oil, essentially. And also, this is a very small increase. I guess my question to you, Jay, is...
But here's my thing is look, there have been recent diplomatic overtures between the Russians and the Saudis. That they seem to be getting along great now. If tomorrow Russia and Saudi Arabia turned off the spigot, would you be happy or unhappy that we have decided to go forward with the Alaska oil drilling?
Well, I would reject the argument, because that's not how it works. It's not that there's a spigot that Russia or Saudi Arabia could turn on or off. I mean, oil, just like this whole ridiculous idea of having energy independence. That's not how fossil fuels work. It's it's a global market. And so I think there's this idea that, well, we'll just produce all the oil that we need for ourselves and our country. And that's just such an incredibly simplified and wrong understanding of how world energy markets work. And so that's why I kind of reject that premise. But let me put something.
I mean, again, Vladimir Putin's able to shut off the natural gas flow to Western Europe. The Saudis in the past there have been oil shocks. There have been trouble in the Suez Canal that have blocked that global supply. What I'm saying is, sure, it's a global market, but there are different components to that global market, and at any given time, they could be taken offline for political reasons or natural disaster regions or whatever.
But I don't think. I guess I see what you're saying.
At that point, we're better saying, well, why don't we? At that point, then what I'm saying is the onus would fall on the U.S. and domestic producers to try to make up more of that global market if other capacity is taken offline.
See, I would argue, and I see what you're saying, and I would argue in the short term, or I would agree that in the short term, that makes sense. But of course, this is a project that really won't start producing anything significantly for a number of years. And I would argue that the smarter.
So let's start today.
Well, see,
start sooner.
Well, see, I think that's where you're fundamentally wrong, because you're ignoring one big part of this is that burning fossil fuels, generally speaking, is a bad thing. And I think you would agree that burning fossil fuels is not good for the environment.
Yeah, I'd say on balance, probably.
On balance, okay. So there's a scenario in which burning fossil fuels is awesome for the environment, or is not bad for the environment.
Yes. In terms of creating burning fossil fuels, providing more energy to for other innovations, for other expansion and
that's a separate thing. I would say
raising the standard of living is better. For
that's not the environment, but that's for well-being.
In sub-Saharan Africa, where people will die because of indoor heating, where they're burning dung to keep their homes warm. Introducing fossil fuels there creates a higher standard of living. Higher standard of living, ironically or not ironically, it sort of makes sense. Tends to result in more concern about the environment and more environmental regulation and conservation. So yeah.
Well, yeah, because when people have a higher standard of living, they tend to use more resources, and that requires more fossil fuels and other things. And so that puts a greater strain on the environment.
Yeah.
And
so they also, when you're talking about, they also, let's put it this way, Mike, our emissions, U.S. emissions, keep going down because of technology. Because we're better at this than we were 50 years ago, 100 years ago, despite having more cars on the road. It's almost like if without your fossil fuels, you don't create your electric vehicles. In fact, there's nothing to run your electric vehicles on for the most part. But without this energy, you don't do things like create the vaccines that you need. You don't have functioning markets to allocate capital. There's a whole lot of what I'm saying is I reject the notion that burning fossil fuels bad completely. I think there's the fact that we rely on them and get a whole lot of energy to do a whole lot of really good things is important. And the idea that you can just say, we'll stop and therefore it's better, or that there's some alternative. And if it's, we'll just do some strip mining to get rare earth elements using slave labor in China. Well, is that better than pumping oil in Alaska? Let's pump in Alaska.
Well, sure, and I think you're right in that the negative consequences associated with renewables have been downplayed by some folks. Those things that you mentioned, certainly, and that needs to be weighed in the balance. And I guess where we tend to disagree on a kind of basic level is you are a lot less concerned about the environmental consequences of burning fossil fuels than I am, right? But I would guess there's a point at which, like, if, for instance, let's say that this project would result in an increase in emissions that's like 10 times what it actually is. Would you? I mean, there's a limit? I would guess, right? At which
I would say, there's obviously a limit where, and again, in the liberal imagination, there are these factories out there that all they do is produce pollution,
right? And that's, of course, not the case.
There was a great, I think, like Onion piece or something about that, about factory now produces 100% pollution, no products. But that's not really the case. And I would say, what do you say to the person in sub-Saharan Africa? Say, hey, you need to cut out fossil fuels, which might bring you and your family fresh water and better medical treatment and economic growth and all the things that go with that. It might get you out of poverty. Compared with, we're really concerned that water levels might rise, and these people already have their houses built on stilts out in Malibu might get flooded.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, I believe that fossil fuels have to be a very important and vital bridge to a better, cleaner energy future, whether that's, some combination of nuclear, hydro, and solar and so forth. But yeah, you can't just say, well, fossil fuels bad, let's just eliminate them. And there are some zealots, I guess you could say, kind of at the far left, who believe that. But I'm with you in that's just not a.
Well, there are some zealots in the administration who said things like, drilling on federal land, period.
Well, sure. And that's, there's campaign rhetoric, and then there's the reality of actually governing. Was it Cuomo said was it Mario Cuomo, who famously so many years ago said you govern in, or you campaign in
you campaign in
poetry and you govern in prose. Yeah, exactly. So, and I think that's sort of the case there, because if we were going to, take, I think you believed in taking Trump seriously, but not literally. And I think if we're going to have that standard, we should have it for all politicians, I would guess, not just, Donald Trump being sociopaths or narcissists or whatever. Anyway. Okay. We hope you enjoyed this preview of our supporters exclusive midweek show. If you'd like to hear the rest of the episode, we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter. Supporters get ad-free access to all of our shows, membership in our Politics Guys Discord group where you can join in on the conversation, and other benefits at different levels of support. To become a supporter, go to patreon.com/politicsguys. You can also support us through Venmo or @politicsguys, or through PayPal. You'll find all of our support links in the show notes, as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And if you'd like to get the midweek show, but you're not in a position to become a financial supporter, that's not a problem. Just send me an email at mike@politicsguys.com, and I'll be happy to get that set up for you.